who is exempt from fasting, who does not have to fast. And what happens? What are the rulings if you don't fast? What do you do? All right. So number one, the first type of people who are exempt from fasting are people who are ill, sick, people who have disorders and other health conditions, people who are of really old age, pregnant women, breastfeeding women, and people who are traveling. How many were there? How many? Anyone count them? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So illness, disorders, other health conditions, old age, pregnancy, breastfeeding, and traveling. The first one, sickness and illness. It only applies to temporary illness. So let's talk about temporary sickness, or in medical terms, onset illness or acute conditions. They're conditions that happen to you like, for example, such as the flu virus, asthma attack, a severe injury, a broken bone, serious wound requiring antibiotics, medication, or loss of a lot of blood and so on, sudden severe low or high blood pressure, mild to serious infections or inflammations, for example, pneumonia, bronchitis, joint and skin infections, inflammations, and so on. All of these are types of serious infections and inflammations. Or for example, diabetes type 2, although it is considered a chronic condition, meaning ongoing, I put it here because it can be managed before and after fasting. Like some people who have type 2 diabetes, they can take insulin pills before in suhoor time and after fasting. And then when it gets bad for them during the day, they need a jelly bean or need to break their fast for some sugar intake, then they break their fast. Such as a sudden sugar depletion can happen in the day before they break their fast. And those who have these conditions, any of what I mentioned here, the likes of them, then it is preferred for them to break their fast and make up another day. Now the old age one, I've got to comment on that. Preferred only if the old age person does have already a lot of several medical conditions like kidney problems and liver problems and heart conditions, then it's preferred for them. But just for merely being old, we'll talk about it in a little bit. If your normal illness is of very serious condition, or you fear serious harm on yourself, then it is haram to fast. Let's say that you have a serious infection and the doctor tells you if you don't break your fast, any moment it's going to go into your bloodstream and you can have a stroke or a heart attack or poisoning. Now that's pretty serious. Then it becomes haram to actually fast because there's a serious life-threatening condition. We move on to the next one. People who have terminal or chronic conditions, which means ongoing sicknesses, requiring intensive ongoing management care such as regular medication and nutrients. For example, diabetes type 1. Those who know what difference is, type 1 is the more severe one. Heart diseases and strokes, lung, kidney, liver diseases, not sickness, disease. Neurological diseases like Alzheimer's or multiple sclerosis and other degenerative diseases and so on. These are all exempt from fasting completely altogether, and they do not need to make up their fast at all. Okay. The first one, who has a temporary sickness, needs to make up that day that they broke their fast later on in the year, when they feel better. The person with a permanent illness or a chronic illness or a terminal illness, they don't need to make up their fast at all, but they need to feed one poor person for each day that they couldn't fast in Ramadan. So it's 29 days or 30 days. They feed approximately, in Australia, it's about $10, $12, which would be enough to feed a poor person. Someone asked me, his father or their parent are very poor. You know, they live just enough for himself and his wife. Anything extra, he can't feed. He can probably feed 1 or 2 people, can't feed 30 people, $600 or $700. So we say to them, you feed as many people as you can. Another way to feed them is from your own food. If you know any poor people around, could be a neighbor, could be homeless, could be someone, you feed them from your own food. Share it, whatever you can. Can't feed for all 60 days, you can't afford it, feed for 15 days. Can't afford 15, feed 10. Can't afford that, feed 1. Can't afford that, feed your own wife and your family. And inshallah, Allah knows. We move on now. What about old age and frailty? This can start from the age of 65 onwards, depending on health and medical advice. I'm not saying everyone here who's over 65 is in a bad condition. I'm saying it starts from 65 onwards that people start to degenerate, can easily get sick, depending on your genetics. If you're like my dad from the village, who's drank all that filtered water from the streams and mountain, mashallah, you know, you're okay to 100 maybe. But inshallah, and all your fathers and mothers. But after 65 onwards, it's a bit careful. You've got to get medical advice. Okay, what about old people? Allah says in the Quran, وَعَلَى الَّذِينَ يُطِيقُونَهُ فِدْيَةٌ طَعَامُ مِسْكِينٍ فَمَنْ تَطَوَّعَ خَيْرًا فَهُوَ خَيْرٌ لَهُ وَأَنْ تَصُومُوا خَيْرٌ لَكُمْ إِن كُنْتُمْ تَعْلَمُونَ. For those who are capable of fasting but still do not fast, there is a redemption, feeding a needy man or a needy person for each day missed. Whoever voluntarily does more good than is required will find it better for him, and that you should fast is better for you if only you knew. So even old people, if they're able to fast and there's no severe health issues, even though they're a bit frail, fasting is better for them. Otherwise, under doctor's advice, feed a poor person for each day and they don't have to make it up at all. Is that clear, inshallah? All right, move on now. And we all know that older people, why are they sort of exempt? Because old age people with malnutrition, if old people don't eat well, even if they feel good, they have a greater risk of things like chronic disease, such as cardiovascular disease and so on, severity of pressure injuries, frailty, debilitations and organ failures. Depending on medical professional advice and overall health, they are exempt. Otherwise, it's better for them to fast. So brothers and sisters, we move on. Someone asked me the other day about mental illness. Sure, what do you think, O dwellers of Preston Mosque? What is your thoughts about mental illness? Yay or nay? Or is it shaitan and some hidden system that's bringing mental illnesses? Is it some kind of powder in the air that some people are conspiring to give mental illness? I've heard these things. People actually tell me all this stuff. Anyway, there is such thing as mental illness, which I've given a talk about it, such as severe depression, severe anxiety. If the severe depression and severe anxiety leads to abnormal physical sicknesses, such as severe fatigue or disability, then that can be taken as a sickness by analogy, by qiyas, to an old man, old woman who is frail. If that mental illness for this person has debilitated them, and it's outside of their control, and truly they're really disabled, then in this case, with medical advice, they can break their fast if they become fatigued or dizzy or unable to move anymore, and make up their day another time. And this is considered sick. So they can break their fast only if eating resolves the problem, and must make up those days because it is not permanent, rather it's episodes. And they must have professional medical advice or diagnosis. You can't just make up your mind. You have to get doctor's advice, who they test your blood pressure. Because what happens, brothers and sisters, let me explain. Not just merely being worried or upset or depressed. I'm not talking about that. We're talking about people where because of severe long-term depression and anxiety, they actually have real problems in their blood. Like, for example, do you know it's established that people with long-term depression, they can develop cardiovascular diseases from it. It affects your health. Yaqub alayhi salam in the Quran, he became blind from long-term sadness. Remember that story? So we are not talking about people who have normal depression. We're talking about people who have been diagnosed with truly debilitating mental illnesses, and it's been for a long time. So these people can feel sick, severely dizzy or vertigo, fainting. You can break your fast, of course. Some people have things like bipolar disorders, autism spectrum disorder, and so on, which can lead to physical sickness and serious behavioral manic attacks without medication. Did you know that? Depending on severity, with medical professional advice, they can break their fast if it resolves the disorder, for example, medication or food. However, they must make up the day since it is an onset and case-by-case situation. I had a case, for example, during the COVID lockdown. I had a case of an autism spectrum disorder, ASD it's called, of a young individual I once counseled in Ramadan, and he or she, I won't say if it's a boy or girl, so we don't want to expose anyone, they had multiple behavioral outbursts like uncontrollable aggression, literally, biting themselves, kicking doors, abusing, can't control themselves, and self-injuries because they had to stop taking their medication. So some people are on the autism spectrum. They engage in uncontrollable biting, hitting, kicking, abusing and swearing. The solution that I made for this young lad, I told him or her to take their medication and make up the days when they felt better. They didn't want to break their fast, but they were causing problems, they're becoming dangerous. So brothers and sisters, the reason I'm saying this is because sometimes we can be judgmental when we lack knowledge. But people who are in a professional field, and people who are experts in that area, and people who have experienced, like I've counseled a lot of people, we actually find out that some of this is true. So Allah does not want hardship. Now, pregnancy and breastfeeding. I talked about it last week, but I'm going to tell you very quickly. Pregnancy. If the pregnant woman or breastfeeding mother fears on herself harm, her own health, let's say she developed diabetes from pregnancy, because that can happen. Severe vitamin D deficiency. It can cause problems for those of you who know. If she fears harm upon herself and the doctors have told her, listen, you got issues here, man, you got a woman, man, you got issues here, you got to take food or water, then what do we say? Yes, break your fast and make up another day. That's all. But if the pregnant woman or breastfeeding woman fears for the health of her baby, not herself, she's fine, but the baby is in trouble, especially in the first 3 months, and the doctors say, listen, the baby is in risk at the moment, you've got to give them good nutrients, your body hasn't got enough, then she is also exempt from fasting, and she makes up that day, and I'll talk to you about what else. There's a bit of a difference of opinion. First of all, how long does breastfeeding last? Like how long does she continue using breastfeeding as an excuse? Let's say she fears that her milk will dry, women are different, and her baby may need milk. And sometimes they might say, well, I'll change it to formula. No. If Allah has given you milk and you're able to lactate and feed the child, continue feeding from yourself. And it is a highly recommended act. In fact, in Bukhari, Imam al-Bukhari has collected hadiths which scholars have said it's even wajib. It's an obligation on a wife who is able to breastfeed without harm to continue for 30 whole months. So how long is 30 months? 2 Ramadans. 2 years almost. 2 Ramadans. She has 2 Ramadans exempted if she fears that her child will not have enough nutrients from her milk. Even if the child's eating but needs the milk. After the 2 Ramadans, that's it. She can't. Even if she's still breastfeeding, she's only got 30 months. That's according to the Quran, 30 shahra. How long does pregnancy exemption last? According to medical advice, or when there is no more potential harm risk on the mother or on the child. So the whole 9 months, depending on each case. Some mothers, when they're pregnant, they have something called hyperemesis. They vomit more, they get dizzy more, they need medications, heavy medications. Some of them take medications that cancer patients take, from how serious it is. So these people are exempt from fasting. What if the pregnant or breastfeeding wife does not have fear on her health or the child's health if she fasts, but, I got this question asked, her husband tells her to break her fast because he is concerned about the baby's health or her health. So the husband says it. Does she obey her husband in this case? The answer is, this is decided by medical professional advice, not her husband's instructions. Why? Because fasting Ramadan is an obligation, it's a fard. It's not like voluntary fasting. If it was voluntary fasting, I'd say listen to your husband. Because obviously husband and wife have needs for each other. Ramadan is a different case. She takes it from medical professional advice. If she herself doesn't fear, her child, she doesn't fear upon him, and they've got the medical advice, the husband can suggest, but she doesn't have to listen to her husband. In fact, she is not allowed, because Allah has commanded fasting Ramadan, and there is no obedience to any creation above Allah. Making up for breaking fast for pregnancy and breastfeeding. There are actually 3 options. The option number 1, she's got to only feed a poor person for each day that she broke her fast for breastfeeding and pregnancy, but she does not make up the days. That's the first opinion. Opinion number 1, feed only, but don't make up. Only feeding 1 poor person per day, no making up fasting, because it goes under the verse, those able to fast but find extreme hardship of old age, terminal sickness, indulges, weakness, and such as pregnancy and breastfeeding falls under those who are old age, same as the verse in the Quran. Ibn Umar and Ibn Abbas, in their opinion, the great companions, they said she doesn't have to make up the day, she just feeds a poor person on behalf of each day. If it was her own health, she feeds. If it was her own health that she worried about, then she feeds a poor person. If it's the child's health that she was worried about, the husband feeds the poor person. Option number 2, or opinion number 2. No, she makes up the day, but she does not feed any poor person. Because the verse says, if you are sick or on a travel, make up other days. The majority opinion is that the Hanafi, Maliki school, the Maliki says only for the pregnant woman, not the breastfeeding. And a few others, majority of you say, she actually only makes up the day, but doesn't feed any poor person. So the husband doesn't feed. That's the other view. If you follow the Hanafi school, then that's what you go by. Opinion number 3, which is probably the safest and best option if you can afford it, a combination of the two. A breastfeeding pregnant woman who had to break her fast, she makes up her day and her husband feeds a poor person per day. And if it was her own health that she was worried about, she feeds a poor person per day if they can afford it. This is the view of the Shafi'i, Hanbali, and one of the Maliki views for breastfeeding only. So, making up is the correct view of nearly all scholars today and some of the past. Feeding is preferred, feeding a poor person is the view if the financial ability of the husband or the wife is able to do it. Because it goes under the verse about temporary sickness, since pregnancy and breastfeeding is temporary case, not permanent like old age and terminal illness, and feeding is preferred because of the verse, hasten and race to Jannah. So brothers and sisters, if you can afford to feed a poor person, if you're going to break your fast for breastfeeding and for pregnancy, then go ahead and make up the day, and that is the safest option. My brothers and sisters, I said people who are traveling can also break their fast. If you go beyond 80 kilometers, whether it's in the aeroplane or in car or on foot or on your horse or camel or goat or donkey, I don't care what it is, you went more than 80 kilometers, then there are 3 cases. Last week I said it is preferred to break your fast, but actually there is another majority view, which is the correct view, inshallah, and that is, number 1, if you are on travel and you feel comfortable, you're comfortable, and there's no hardship on you, then it is preferred for you to continue fasting, because the Prophet ﷺ also fasted when he was on travel. Number 2, if you go on travel and you find yourself in hardship and tiredness because of the travel, then it is better to break your fast. Because the hadith in Bukhari about piety, Rasulullah ﷺ said, piety is not in fasting while traveling. That has a context. The remainder of the hadith is the Prophet ﷺ went out with his companions, and then when they were on their travel, they saw 2 men, and they were very fatigued. They're about to just drop because of their traveling, and they wanted to remain fasting, thinking it's more pious. The Prophet, peace be upon him, said, why are these people still fasting? And they're so fatigued like that. They said, Ya Rasulullah, they want to keep fasting. And that's when he said, there is no piety in fasting on travel, meaning if you are fatigued, because travel causes you fatigue. And the third case is when traveling causes extreme fatigue and there is serious fear of serious illness, serious illness that's going to harm you tremendously, then it becomes haram to fast on travel. And what do you do then? You make up those days when you are back home, inshallah. Does that make sense? Now we have to rush through what breaks your fast and what doesn't break your fast.